Welcome to Nature Calls, everybody. It's good to see everyone. I'm Jeff Ware, the Director of Philanthropy for TNC Alabama. The first thing I want to let you know is that we are recording this Zoom. Second, we're going to mute your microphones and ask if you want to comment that you type your comment or question into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. This makes it easier for our presenter to manage the questions and answers at the end of the presentation. We call this program Nature Calls because it's our attempt to get you out of the house virtually and into our conservation work around the state. The program will be approximately 15 minutes long, with another 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end. We feature a new conservation program every week on Thursdays at 3 p.m. And we've only got 3 more to go, so you don't want to miss any of them. I'm pleased to introduce Alex Varner, our Mountain Longleaf Pine Conservation Coordinator. And Alex is going to share photos of his efforts to conserve this unique and threatened habitat system, along with a fast-paced narration of the work we're doing at the Talladega Mountain Longleaf Pine Conservation Partnership. I think I got all of that out correctly. Alex is also, just as an FYI, our resident coffee expert. Alex, take it away.
All right. Thank you all for being here. And let's see if I can get all of this right. There it is. There. All right. Here we go. All right. So I'm just going to give you an introduction here to some of the work that we do, and specifically that I do as well, on Mountain Longleaf Pine and the Talladega Mountains Longleaf Pine Conservation Partnership. Let's start. I'll start with just a little brief intro on Mountain Longleaf Pine, and then I'll drift into the partnership just to explain some of the work that we do and how we get that work done. And number one, I guess, as you can read here, that we strive to maintain, improve, and restore all of the longleaf across the range. And here is a jump right into it shot of this is some longleaf on the National Forest. This is in the Talladega National Forest, which is the core of a lot of where I work. There are 3 districts. This in particular is in the Okmulgee district, and that is in the Fall Line Hills, so it's not as mountainous there, but we include it in the geographical area. There's significant geographical area because of the importance of this area to longleaf conservation throughout its range. And that looks like a fire in the early spring there, but you can see it's kind of rolling hills and dominated by older longleaf pine with a mixture of hardwoods in there. And so quickly we'll go into, this is some of the range map for the state of Alabama. This is from 1928. And those individual dots represent, on the left-hand side there, represent significant areas of longleaf pine growth. And as you can see, this area uniquely for Montane longleaf or mountain longleaf is that we actually get up into the northern part of the state, which is a different area for longleaf throughout its range. And that range, again, is from Virginia to Texas. And we'll see a map of that coming up. And this map to the right, if you can see it, just gives you another how extensive longleaf gets into the state of Alabama. And some of these areas, like up into Winston County, which is way over there, and into DeKalb, so it actually comes down into just barely into Little River Canyon National Preserve. And it reaches its elevational extent in the Talladega National Forest over on this district, which is Cheaha Mountain, the state's highest point. So it makes it up to about 2,100 feet over there. It's really interesting. And this is a map, and this is actually one that I believe this is from some research my brother did. And this shows you that little knob of longleaf growth, which makes a transition kind of only here in the state of Alabama and Georgia does it get up this high into these different physiographic regions. And as you can see here, I've got them out. It's the Blue Ridge, Harper's Blue Ridge, Cumberland Plateau, Ridge and Valley, and Piedmont. And generally throughout the range, you're going to find longleaf down in the lower and upper coastal plain. And at some spots, I guess in significance would be the Uwharrie Mountains in North Carolina, where it actually makes it low into the Piedmont. But we sort of reserve mountain longleaf for just this unique area in Alabama and Georgia, where it really makes it up into these mountains. And this is just a physiographic region map of the state, just showing you how diverse this great state is, and how different these areas are that we find longleaf pine in this state. And for the Montane area, or the mountain area, we have it going up into just all these different soil types and areas. And a lot of that has to do with, well, we'll go back to that. This is just to show regional 8 biodiversity. The red area is the highest biodiversity. And this area that is part of the significant geographic area that is part of the partnership, as you see, just really deep reds here that also go up into the mountains. And so for biodiversity within the region, this is an incredibly significant area. And this is just a quick, just showing you, which is kind of interesting. This is a lightning detection map from 2005 to 14. And it's hard to see, but there's the lobe that goes into where the mountain longleaf area is all orange with a scattering of purples that run up into the mountains there. And it's the same here in this map, where one of the drivers of this system, or the main driver of this system, is fire. And as you can see, that these little lobes here, some of this is going to be tallgrass prairie region historically, but this here in longleaf, where it gets up into the mountains, you have a significant area of fire frequency. And this is just from 1997 to, I can't actually even read the rest of that, 11 or 12. But throughout longleaf's range, generally we think of the fire return interval as 1 to 3 years, and it's about the same in the Montane area, where it's 1 to 5 is what we think of it as. And this is a map from America's Longleaf that has these significant landscapes within the entire longleaf range, which stretches from Texas to Virginia. And these little dots are indicating the acreage areas. And so everywhere else you see is all in these lower areas. It's coastal plain and just a little skinned up edge in the lower Piedmont. But then the Talladega Mountains area is the only spot where it just jumps up in and gets into these rocky areas. And you actually see the longleaf in these areas growing straight out of Cheeha quartzite up at 2,000 feet, which is a very unique area for longleaf. It's just totally out of range, or totally out of what most people think of it as they think of it these flat rolling hills, but it's a steeper. And I'm going to try not to read these and let y'all read through, but quickly, part of the America's Longleaf goal is to get back to 8 million acres, and that should be maintaining, improving, and restoring the habitat throughout the entire range. Now, this is a dive down. I want to thank Keith and Dina Knight for this. Keith Hassan. This is a map showing the SGA, or the significant geographic area, that I consider the area that I work in. Sorry about that. And so so this little area right there, that's Birmingham, where my arrow is. That's Tuscaloosa. Then there's Rome, Georgia right there. And that's a state line cutting through, and Fort Payne at the edge. But these are all very significant tracts of longleaf. Most of these areas here are federally owned, and that's all Talladega National Forest, the 3 districts. We also have this area here, which is the Mountain Longleaf National Wildlife Refuge. And we also have the Cahaba National Wildlife Refuge. And over here we have extensive areas this is federal land here in permanent protection. And we have some mixed in state lands as well, and some state forests up in Georgia, most notably Paulding and Sheffield state forests. But this is a huge map that has the focus areas, and included in this is climate flow and corridors, which Keith and Dina worked on, that gives us a look at what we should be trying to get our protection towards in the long term. And so let's do a little dive into the partnership. And so this partnership was started in 2013. We have a number of people that got involved, partners, or how we get work done to get the greatest conservation work for our efforts. And, you know, again, our mission is to increase and restore longleaf pine systems in central Alabama, northwest Georgia. And there's partnership's vision, restoring and keeping these unique communities within Montane longleaf. And some of these pictures are some young longleaf with a back on fire, and it's actually some red cockaded woodpecker trees. These are just some of the restoration projects in the SGA here. Many of these are TNC properties like Bibb County Glades, Roberta Case Pine Hills Preserve, and then other areas that we work in. And these are the partners that are involved in the partnership here. And we couldn't get any work done without the help of all of these folks. And we get together and kind of pool our resources and write grants and get money moving around in the entire area. And again, they're all just integral to the work that we get done with this partnership. And this is another, as part of that partnership, we go out, and that's me in the Talladega National Forest with Alabama Power employees. And we were just talking about fire. That's an area that one of the crews that we get funding for, or one of the prescribed fire crews, burned that area a few months earlier. And so I had a good field day with Alabama Power employees who actually put some money into that grant that year to help pay for the work that was being done. So it was a really good day talking to them about the restoration work. And that's another quick shot of the red cockaded woodpecker there. That one's got a band on it, and a tree on a steep slope, and that is a red cockaded woodpecker cavity tree. Sorry about that. That you can see with significant sap flows on it, and they band all those cavity trees with a white band, and we're burning those out before the larger fire comes through. And that's actually a night burn on that same forest. We had a wildfire, and the crew that I was on, we had to go and burn out the cavity trees. That was about 10 o'clock at night that night. It was kind of it was a really beautiful night. It was the first day of spring, in fact. And that's a quick shot of the Shoal Creek district. You can see how steep that is. It's kind of hard to see. And that's a hardwood, a north slope of hardwoods. And then at the top is all longleaf with a fire along the ridge that's going to slowly creep its way down. It actually made it all the way to the creek that day. So there's a real mixture of forests in that area. There's a quick shot of Weogufka Creek down below, and that looks pretty hot, but this is the first time that fire has been introduced into this site. And well, as long back, we don't know when it was there before, but at least 50 years. And actually all of these overstory trees are flushing out. You can't see how that is. And the shrub layer is primarily mountain laurel, and it is all resprouting, and it'll resprout and create just another little shrub layer. This is very steep ground. And next, there's some Oak Mountain State Park. That is all mostly a bare sandstone outcrop there. But I did have one tree that I cored had a 7-inch diameter at breast height. So 7 inches diameter at chest height with 170 rings in it. So these trees get really old just growing on these terribly tough sites, and there's an old flat top in the background. There are actually some old red-cockaded woodpecker cavities there, and that's growing just almost out of bare sandstone there. It's a really neat spot. And these are just some quick shots historically to give you an idea of how open it was. This is in Bibb County. This is a Roland Harper picture from 1911, I believe. And another one from Bibb County. That just shows you how open and burned these areas were historically. Again, this is 1911, before we really started putting out fires across the landscape. And that's a longleaf pine, some big old ones. You can see fire scars at the bases, and the oaks are likely post oak and blackjack oak and some others mixed in. It's a quick shot of our Bibb County Glades Preserve. It's on Ketona dolomite, a terribly tough place to grow for any kind of plant. But this particular site has 61 rare plants and 8 that are found only in this area. This is another shot of the area from the bottom that I showed you from Coosa County, Alabama. It's a steep ridge with Weogufka Creek at the bottom. You can see some mountain laurel still blooming that made it out of the fire. And that area, again, was the first time it's seen fire. And as far back as we know, there are no visible fire scars on any of it. And in that area also, we have a bunch of rhododendron minus, which is a dwarf rhododendron, a really neat area that hopefully we have more access and influence on later on. Quick shot, Bibb County again, open longleaf, 1900, turn of the century. And even though other parts of the longleaf range have pitcher plants, we do as well. Notably, we've got Alabama canebrakes, but these are the green pitcher plants, Sarracenia aureophila. And this is one of our TNC's Coosa Bog sites in Cherokee County. And one thing that we have in the mountains in the Montane range of longleaf is we can actually get rocky waterfalls, which is something you're not going to see down in the coastal plain. And this is High Falls in the Talladega National Forest. And actually right above this, there's some really old longleaf that had a little bit of fire years back. And ending it on that there, the key to this ecosystem, like all longleaf, is fire. And so you got to get it there. All right, that is the end.
Thank you, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a few questions for you here.
Okay.
From Steve Crockett. Point of Pines is called a slash pine savanna. How is a slash pine different from longleaf?
Well, they're just two different species. They kind of in coastal plain areas, their ranges will overlap. Slash pine does not have a grass stage, which longleaf does, which is a protection from fire. Although slash pine is incredibly resilient to fire just as much, and it's the second most flammable needle litter in North America. To longleaf is number 1. But they are very similar. A lot of people have trouble telling them apart, and they grow, but slash pine is pretty restricted to coastal plain growing, and in a lot of parts of the Florida Panhandle, you'll see it kind of below the Interstate 10, but very similar trees, just some slight differences.
Okay, next question from someone we know and love, Mitchell Reed. Where are the oldest longleaf left in the state? And he says, I've heard that Coosa County has some old ones.
That is indeed correct. Yep, you got it right there, Mitch. That is the oldest ones that we know of that have been cored are actually in Coosa County. And I had a picture on here, and I wanted to show it, but that tree is, gosh, 397, I believe, which is pretty old. But around that area, we just had some data from a forester who was out there, and those seem to be the oldest longleaf pine that we know, maybe some of the oldest in the range. There's a couple of individuals in the coastal plain, but Alabama has some of the oldest longleaf left in the range, and a lot of that is in Coosa County, Alabama, near Flag Mountain. So if you go up to Flag Mountain, you can actually drive by one of the oldest tree, I think, that's been quartered in the state. There used to be a couple old growth patches down in the coastal plain, notably in Washington County and in Flomaton, but those are now gone. So this is some of the oldest extant longleaf in the entire range, and just really beautiful individuals, and just a really rich and just a beautiful, incredible place.
Jessica Mitchell asks, what sort of results are you looking for when you go back to a site you have already burned?
Yeah, very good question. For instance, that picture that I showed you, the Coosa County, one of the things that we were looking at on that individual site was that we're trying to see, we're hoping to see no significant mortality to the older trees. And that usually happens from duff burning. And so that was the number one thing we were looking for on that site. But on other sites, we're looking for, if there's any mortality from the fires that we did. We look for what's coming back in the herbaceous layer and the understory. If we're looking to reduce hardwood competition, which is one of the biggest issues in a lot of longleaf, there's mesic hardwood invasion. So just wet hardwoods invade out of the bottoms and take over the ridges. And we want to try to see if we've done our best job at knocking them back and then increasing other fine flashy fuels like the grasses on the site. So we're always looking to try to get grasses on the site more predominantly. And interestingly, at that Coosa County site, we have researchers from Tall Timbers Research Station in Tallahassee that are looking at what kind of plants are returning to the herbaceous layer after we introduce fire that's been gone for that long. And so actually what they're seeing is a marked increase in plants in the herbaceous layer that are returning. And many of those some of them are from seed, and a lot of them have actually just been dormant down in these deep soil layers. So they can hang around for 30 to 50 years, just the roots, which is really, just kind of amazing. And some of the work that was done at Berry College, actually, when they returned fire to these long unburned stands, they started out with 30 different species in the herbaceous layer. They ended up with 140. So just these tremendous increases in species diversity just from the reintroduction of fire and opening up that area to sunlight, and exposure to the chemical reactions and mechanical reactions that are related to that fire.
Thanks, Alex. Elizabeth, I see you have your hand up, and I'm going to call on you in just a minute, but we've got a question from Brian Etheridge, and he asks, is burning a stand of longleaf annually too often?
That's a good question. It kind of depends on the stand, Matt. I certainly don't have any problem with it. The only issue that you will come into sometimes with an annual fire in those stands is that you will commonly miss your regeneration. So you're not going to catch your cone crop. And so you won't really have any regeneration in there, which is actually, you'll kill the seeds that fall will get burned. So if you need a little bit of buffer for them to set deeper, because those little tiny seedlings cannot survive it. And so you'll end up with this really pretty stand that's got grass everywhere, and it's wide open, and you remove a lot of your competition. But if you're looking to get any regeneration in there, you're going to need to have a couple of years at some point. But you can certainly burn them every year if you have the fuel. Actually, one of the areas that we just burned down the coastal plain, the fire that Keith led last week, a portion of that had burned 3 years in a row, and it really cooked through there and did a great job. But again, the only problem you'll have is that you're going to miss regeneration at some point. But you can certainly do it, and it looks great. And actually, and I'm going too far here, but some of the areas on Red Tail Ridge and Caffey Hill in the Mountain Longleaf National Wildlife Refuge, they were receiving fire sometimes twice a year from from when the Army was still shooting live rounds into that area. And it's a beautiful stand. It was grassy with 300-year-old trees, but there weren't any trees below about 60 years in age. Everything was old. You know, it looked great as a very park-like, but you're missing any kind of young stuff because it's not getting a chance to set itself up.
Okay, Elizabeth, who is calling us from somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean.
Gulf of Mexico.
Gulf of Mexico. Okay, close enough. Go ahead.
This is Hardy. I've got a question. Elizabeth planted 100 acres of longleaf about 10 years ago. The site is surrounded by site indexes well over 100, but its history was cotton fields for 50 years, cattle pasture for 50 years, and then longleaf planted. What's going to happen to that longleaf? Is that ground going to be so compacted, or is it going to grow like crazy?
Yeah, it's hard to say. It should be fine, giving it some time, and you know, be sure you're getting fire on it.
Yeah, it's 10 years old. It's been burned twice already.
Oh, great. Well, how does it look so far?
The trees, I don't know what the BHD on them is. I had never measured it, but they're about 30 feet tall.
Oh wow, great. Yeah, that sounds great. I wouldn't have any worries about that. That sounds wonderful. Yeah, you keep burning that. You know, even with a history of land use that's, you know, with heavy soil compaction from cattle or anything else, and row crops and everything else, where you lose your, I guess the biggest thing you lose in a situation like that is your ground cover's not there.
Yeah, it's not going to be there, is it?
Right. It's not. Well, I mean, there are great ways to bring it back. You can do it. I worked on some projects in the Panhandle of Florida, and we took a site that had nothing there and hit reset. And now, if you walk through it, you've got longleaf in there, and you got wiregrass up to your stomach in those areas.
At what point did you reset the other?
Well, that was the trick, is that we did that. We planted the grass seed and the other flowers and everything else at the same time. You know.
Yeah, exactly, simultaneous.
Right, but you can still come back when those trees are a little bit more thinned out, and you can do thinner plantings. They planted like 500 to the acre or something. Okay. Yeah, I mean, you could, you know, I'll tell you, they have an ATV planter. We could talk about this some other time, but they have an ATV planter that you can pull behind it, which is basically a little modified planter that you can pull behind an ATV. And I would do it right after you burned, when you have a fresh soil to work with, and you can get some of that herbaceous, you know, that ground cover back. It's just a little bit more work. Sounds like you're gonna have a wonderful stand. If you're burning it and you're getting that kind of good growth, that sounds great. I'm jealous.
Yeah, thank you for the information.
Alex, thank you so much. I think we're right at the end of our time here. That was a great program. I really appreciate you doing this, and I know all of our guests do as well. Next week, Nature Calls is going to feature Chuck Bird, our land steward and our resident expert on rare plants. And Chuck is going to have an especially interesting program about all of our TNC Alabama nature preserves. I know you won't want to miss that. Everyone on this Zoom call today will receive an invitation to next week's program. Feel free to share that invitation with your friends. You can just forward the email that you receive, or if you want, you can send us their email address and name, and we will send them the invitation. Either way, I hope you'll join us and that you'll bring somebody with you. As we can see, conservation never stops. The work goes on, even during a pandemic. Even when many of us are still working from home, our conservation staff is still in the field doing the important work that Alabama needs from the Nature Conservancy. As a result of that, we need your financial support now more than ever. If you can, please make a gift today at support.nature.org/Alabama. And just as a side note, the Daniel Foundation of Alabama, great friends of the Nature Conservancy, have awarded us a $75,000 challenge grant. That means for every dollar we raise, the Daniel Foundation will match it with another dollar up to $75,000. So that effectively doubles your gift to TNC. Help us out, please, with a gift today, and thank you so much for joining us on Nature Calls. Bye, everybody.